Greetings, friends. You are on the channel Military Reports. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of June, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. And we will start with you in Kiev, to be more precise, with icons in the area of the city of Kiev. According to information that can be found in open networks, over the past day, over the last night, past nights, morning, the Russian aerospace forces have launched a massive strike on the territory of Ukraine with the use of Geranium-type drones and ballistic missiles. As you can see, there is a map of the approximate affected area in front of your eyes. Strikes were carried out on cities along the Dnieper. The main blows were struck here in the Vinnytsia region, in Nikolaev, and, of course, the Mirgorod airfield in the Poltava region. There is also a map published online of exactly what was used for strikes. As you can see, most of the strikes were carried out with the use of drones. And several strikes were also carried out with the use of ballistics. At least as of the evening, strikes by Iskanders-K and one ballistic missile of an unidentified type were recorded. And the explosion itself occurred precisely in the area of the city of Dnipro. And there are a lot of important points here. Today, information is also being received. This is exactly the orange stripe, this orange line. This is the ballistics that was used to strike near the city of Dnipro, in Dnipropetrovsk, as it is more convenient. And the most interesting thing is that the public sources report that they remained invisible to the Ukrainian air defense for a very long time. That is, according to the incoming information, the launch and departure were recorded, but they were able to see them directly, either understand them or react somehow already at the very moment, or before the very moment of the strike on the settlement, or rather on objects in the area of the settlement. Perhaps the Russian army has somehow updated some of its ballistic missiles. Even if you look at this map, there is a transcript at the bottom of which missiles were struck. Then the purple-pink missiles are written Iskanderka. There's something else, but this strike is as if assessed as simply ballistic missiles of an unidentified type or an inconspicuous, unknown type. And information is also received directly from Ukrainian sources on the work of the air defense. As it turns out, almost all the Shahids were beaten, almost all the Shahids, 1 out of 2 Ha-59, and now pay attention, 0 out of 3 Iskanders. In other words, as I would repeat, according to the incoming information from Ukrainian sources, they did not see these ballistic missiles. And of course the most important question is, what is the purpose? And what is the reason why the Russian army has been delivering such a massive blow for several days in a row? If we follow some pattern of behavior, then it is obvious that after such a series of strikes, we should expect the beginning of some kind of offensive, because every time such strikes are carried out, either the Ukrainian or the Russian side begins another large-scale offensive. And here it is very important to note, I would like to draw your attention to several posts that were published by pro-Russian channels. I love them reading these Telegram channels. They always have a very interesting idea. So let's read these posts together. Field Marshal Sear was given 45 days to organize the preparation of a counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region and Zaporozhye. The main Directorate of Intelligence planned today attacked the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, hitting the substation in Energodar. Provocation requires support on the fronts. The winners are expected until the first decade of July. In other words, today is already the 20th of June, that is, there are 20 days left before some kind of show, or some kind of media victory. Active preparations are underway. From this Friday, that is, tomorrow from the 21st, a temporary air bridge will be installed between the United States and Poland for the transfer of armored vehicles and ammunition. BMP tanks with Bird will be transferred from Romania and Bulgaria by ships. Swedish, Italian, German production. There is an accumulation of Storm Shadow and attacks missiles. Repair shops are being equipped in the underground parking lots of shopping centers in Kherson and Dnipro. Danish and British military doctors are preparing field hospitals in Odessa, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Nikolaev for 30,000 fighters. Italy, Croatia, Belgium, and the Netherlands have been sending 2300 military doctors and medics to work and train in these field conditions since Monday. Finland and the Baltic states will send a limited contingent of military specialists to protect the air of these hospitals and rep organizations. In other words, the entire peace summit, led by the EU leaders, is preparing to give battle to the armed forces of the Russian Federation. In other words, a very interesting post, and there was also a comment from another pro-Russian source, for example, that information about the preparation of a strategic offensive operation by the armed forces of Ukraine in two directions is increasingly being confirmed. We get the data from the statistical centers of the shopping center. They talk about increased collection and accumulation of people at the pickup points. There are few media outlets in Ukraine, but information is leaking about the overfulfillment of the mobilization plan. Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, fulfilling the decision of Zelensky's headquarters, is preparing a breakthrough grouping of up to 100,000 people in the direction of the south and north. Yes, the qualitative composition of this army has become much to be desired, as well as security, but the fact remains. And here, of course, it is worth understanding one more point, that plus the concentration of foreign military continues in Odessa, Kharkiv. Over the past month, from 200 to 500 soldiers of the French Legion have arrived in Odessa alone, and about 300 have arrived in Kharkiv. In other words, we must understand with you that according to this topic, it is planned to strike these posts again at work, in order to reach Tokmak, that is, to overcome this line of defense between the Orkhov settlement of Tokmak. This is the first elongation, grouping of troops south, as according to this post, the second is Kharkiv. It is planned to assemble a group of 100,000 people in two directions. But here we need to understand a very important point, that, let's say, if a grouping of 50,000 is distributed for each, that is, Orakhovskaya, let's say 5 Tokmak and Kharkiv. Then if we talk about Kharkiv, then 50,000 personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine do not need to restore control over the border of Ukraine. 50,000 people are not needed here, 15,000, perhaps 15,000, will be enough here. Of course, it is difficult to understand what kind of Russian forces are here, but if we proceed from open sources, that the grouping is limited on the Kharkiv direction from the Russian side, yes it is limited, then 15,000 APU will be enough. That gradually it is possible to restore control over all the lost territories within these borders. 50,000 personnel is the group that is being formed to enter the settlement of Shebekin. It is obvious that the Ukrainian side also has plans to create, let's say, a sanitary zone. But the purpose of the sanitary zone of the Russian Federation is to reduce the number of attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation from the same vampire HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. If we talk about the Ukrainian side, the purpose of creating sanitary control, on the contrary, is to increase the intensity of shelling of the settlement of Belgorod. Well, we will observe, but for now, let's talk about what happened. Software in the area of the settlement of Gluboko, no news, no changes. Over the past day, the AFU has undertaken several offensive operations in small groups of 15 people. All attacks were repulsed. There is a lot of interesting information coming from Volchansk, and, as you can see, we have painted the territories back. Let's say these forests are in the area of Zibin. Control of the APU has been restored in the Pacific region. More precisely, to be more precise, this information is still published about neutral cartographers, and to be even more precise, in the first days, let's say, the offensive operation that took place there on the 10th, 11th, 12th, 14th, 15th of May, this is up to the 20th, while the front line is more or less stabilized. There were a lot of hat throwers in the network. We remember those first days of posts, how simple everything is, hey, hooray. That's the whole thing that was here, and they painted the map as they wanted. And sometimes it came to the situation that who would paint better and more right here. And of course, over time, when the front line stabilized, when it became clear that individual cartographers made mistakes in their adjustments, then the whole process of painting aside the whole map in the opposite direction began with the words there were errors there of unverified information and so on and so forth. All this territory, which you now see in yellow flickering before your eyes, is not the territory that was conquered by the APU. It was in the gray zone, or rather it was in question. There was no color here. If you remember the previous configuration, it was like this color, that is, without color. But due to the fact that since the 20th of May, not a single information, not a single frame about control has been received. And control over the quiet and the swell has also been confirmed, according to the data of various, let's say more or less reliable sources. This territory was painted back to the color of control in court. Since initially it was not, there were reasons to change the color of this territory. As for the provoked facts, today, the armed forces of Ukraine published footage of assault events, to be more precise, by the 36th Brigade of a separate Marine Brigade of Marines, as the AFU units tried to regain control of the main supply route that connects Tikhaya and the settlement of Volchansk. And during the fighting, it was possible to regain control over this area, to take one strong point, at least according to geolocations. I repeat once again that the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting, trying to repel attacks and assault actions of Russian units in Volchansk. However, their capabilities are extremely limited. They are able to use mainly light infantry, something that can easily be transferred across the Wolf River, in order to drive heavy equipment into the city and try to maneuver more or less, to be mobile. The APU needs to restore control here at this height and over the Volchansk-Tikhaya road. In case of successful recovery, then the equipment will begin to enter the city. In other words, this is an extremely important stronghold of Russian units, an extremely important area, and in fact, the battle for Volchansk may even be decided not in the aggregate plant, not in the citadel, but it is decided on the eastern flank, and with the question of whether Russian units will be able to hold this bridgehead, while, let's say, northern Volchansk is being cleaned up. As for Severny Volchansk, according to the grouping of troops north, there is a re-clearing of, say, forests, woodlands located in the radiation of the Volchya River. That is, so it is said of the radiated river Volchya. I understand that according to this radiated Volchya River, this is this area, which is what we are talking about. If, well, also to say, we can assume that this is the radiated Volchya River, there is also a forest here, but most likely it is too big, and as if it is not quite the city of Volchansk anymore. And if we talk about hunger, then this is the area. That is, according to the incoming information, assault actions are being conducted here in order to reach this bridge and block at least reinforcements that the APU still has the ability to transfer, say, from southern Volchansk to northern Volchansk in the area of the aggregate plant, that is, here. As soon as these routes are cut, in general, the overall situation will be a little easier. For example, it will be possible to breathe and then concentrate the released forces to clean up the aggregate plant itself and encirclement, squeezing out the positions of the 71st Brigade, the Jager Brigade from the citadel. And the parties continued to exchange artillery strikes. Highly published footage of artillery strikes on infantry units of the Russian army in the area of Volchansk. As you can see, the city has already been almost wiped off the face of the earth, literally, in a month of fighting. Here, Russian units, buildings are moving, in small throws, let's say, without going out into the open. And in turn, the Russian units published footage of artillery strikes on the positions of the AFU north of the aggregate plant, which confirms the control of this area by Ukrainian soldiers. In other words, in general, we see with you that the front line that you are now seeing before your eyes, it is more or less confirmed by geolocations, and, in general, this corresponds to the reality that is now in this direction. Well, then, we are moving with you to the Kupinsky direction, to the North Kupinsky direction. Assault operations by Russian units continue here in the area of the main stronghold. The remaining last stronghold near Kislovka, Ketolevka, Stepovaya, Novoselovka. This is the territory between the road N32, here on N26, and the railway that leads from Kupinsk to the area of Kislovka-Kotlyrovka. The main artillery and air strikes are carried out here. According to individual sources, it is not to say that these are, let's say, reliable sources, there is just some information. Information is being received that Russian units have managed not only to gain a foothold, enter the eastern, let's say, Sandy, but also to move deeper further. Most likely, the geolocation of the presence of Russian units in southern Sandy has not been published yet. But I understand that there is a river that is Sandy, which divides the village into two parts. Northern creatures and farms, and southern with a small amount of development. Most likely, it was in the southern part that they entered, but most likely they did not force the Sandy River yet. That is, there is progress here, it will go further, perhaps somewhere at some point they will try to cross. Or they will try to storm from the Tebayevka area. But if you go from the Tebayevka area, that is, this route, then there will certainly be a large number of APU strongholds on the way, which also managed to dig up. According to Borovaya, I remind you that the other day information was received from the pro-Ukrainian Deep. The state that in the near future, Russian units with a concentrated group of 10,000 fresh soldiers will begin to storm in the direction of Oskol, including through Borovaya. And here too many analysts publish some of their information. But what is worth paying attention to is the number of fortifications. Borovaya is heavily fortified, of course. We see with you a large number of supports even on our map. Please note that every kilometer there is another company stronghold, and we do not take into account the number of trench cops who simply accumulate daily. That is, if the movement to Borovaya begins, then well, it can't be said that it will be a straight easy walk. On a spring morning, there will be serious fighting, perhaps like taking Cherry Kaponki, the same first line of defense. Perhaps it will be broken there within a month. That is, this meet is Yurevka, Andriivka, Cherry, Kaponki, Novosergeyevka, Novoigorevka, perhaps a black tire. This line will take well quickly enough, but it's already hard to talk about further progress since the supports begin. But perhaps from the Kaponka line it will be possible to establish some kind of artillery control, and already inflict fire damage on the settlement from a distance of 16 kilometers. Perhaps this is the main task to get out. Start firing from all over that area with barrel artillery. And again, in confirmation of the version that the Russian units will still go in the direction of Borovaya. Such footage of air strikes with either bombs or Iskanders has been published. The posts contained information about Iskander strikes on the ferry, located between Borovaya and Gorokhovatka. But we see with you that, in general, the slippery reservoir itself has become very shallow. That is, even if you look, let's say now at this frame, for the first seconds, let's say yes, then we see with you some kind of land. Some islands. Pay attention, let's wait again. Look at some island here, some land, a very small distance between one shore and the second. And if we look at the slippery reservoir with you from a closer distance, we see that it does not correspond at all, and even more so. There is no island. Yes, here is some kind of island, yes here. And if you look at satellite images, then the slippery reservoir is extremely shallow as much as possible. Let's take a look. Here there is, by the way, unfortunately, no map has been added. There were maps and satellite images of the area. There are already extreme difficulties to cross here, and there is no sliding reservoir at all now, at least at this time of year. Therefore, crossings are being destroyed, logistics is being cut off, perhaps traffic will really start here in the near future. There is little news in the Seversky direction. Assault operations are underway. Attempts are being made to break through the defense in Razdalovka and take out the APU to retreat. The same situation is in the disputed Belogoriyevka, Verkhnykamiansk, but without any significant news, updates on the map. In Kalinovka today, more and more often, and not only today, these days more and more information is coming from Kalinovka itself. To be more precise, from the Seversky Donetsk Donbass channel. Already pro-Ukrainian sources also do not hide and publish footage of the location of Russian army equipment along the canal. Of course, while the footage of the destroyed equipment is being published, but mostly we know the tactics. Now the main task is to get on the armor, yes, some kind of another trench, to land troops there. Most likely, the brick building is already under the control of Russian units. Well, the equipment there is finished off within a few minutes by the drones that have already arrived. In other words, according to the incoming information, the presence of Russian units was recorded here, once again. The presence of Russian units was recorded. Of course, the fighting for the crossing is underway. If we talk about the citadel itself from the Yar, there are no changes here. Footage is published of artillery strikes, powerful artillery attacks on the Ukrainian Max Proshka, which seeks to the citadel for the purpose of bringing, possibly feeding, reinforcement of the bull. That is, well, as long as we see here, there is an opportunity even for the USU to bring some supplies during the daytime. That is, here, despite the fact that the Ukrainians are pressed to the canal, there is still an opportunity to calmly conduct defense in this citadel. As for the Toretsk agglomeration, I remind you that there has been very loud news in recent days. Everyone was making a lot of noise, everyone was expecting some kind of shaky posts again. And there were incomprehensible breakthroughs, and so on and so forth. And I remind you that until now, 3 days have already passed since the publication of the information of the breakthrough in the Friendship area. Not a single geolocation of those assault actions was published. Of course, we do not deny the probability of the possibility of those operations, but a very strange picture turns out. If we take information from hidden sources, the Ukrainians announced that Russian troops began to advance on Druzhby, began to advance on Alexandropol. Then Ukrainian sources began to publish that the Russian troops managed to break through the defense in Klins for 9 kilometers there, to reach the Dnieper almost, and so on and so forth. And on the third day, information is received that reinforcements arrived and managed to stabilize the situation. No frames, no videos, nothing. It's just that some kind of story has been created, and in the end, we see some kind of help on the result. I would not be surprised if information arrives within a few days. And all this information is naturally supported by Ukrainian deep state cartographers. There will be information that the APU has regained control over previously lost territories. And then the victory will be finally consolidated, at least on paper and in telegram posts. Again, I repeat, there were no confirmatory moments on this operation. And we do not exclude the same situation we encountered you in Osheretino, when Russian units were already in the area of Novoalexandrovka, and we did not have any geolocation of Pocheritin yet. It is likely that something similar is happening in Toretsky, New York, but we need to wait more time for the fog of war to dissipate in general. As for the western Avdiivka direction, the main military operations in several directions are being conducted here. Further assault operations are being conducted in Novoalexandrovka. Footage of the presence of Russian units on Novoalexandrovka itself is being published. The 111th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine publishes footage of strikes on Russian units. That is, there was, after the next strike, Russian soldiers jumped out of the building and changed their position. In other words, the presence was recorded here. That is, it unequivocally confirms and once again control over the settlement. The area of the village of Sokol, the area of responsibility of the 47th Brigade, is mechanized by the AFU. The fighting is being conducted in the area of the settlement, as well as a nascent stronghold located to the north. Today, some pro-Russian cartographers, noting that this stronghold has come under the full control of Russian units, and, in general, its cleaning has been completed. Now it is expected, respectively, the resumption and intensification of hostilities already in the village of Yevgenyevka, since there are several meters from the spring to the main road Dostnaya Street. Perhaps in the near future, and even more so, individual cartographers, well, there are already such and such cartographers. Note that the progress of Russian units is already approximately like this. So far, this information has not been confirmed by anyone at all, but there are already separate resources, separate sources, that draw their maps in this way. Of course, we are not running ahead of the train yet. Perhaps this situation already really corresponds to reality, but it is worth waiting for more information from more reliable sources. In Novoselovka, the first ones, as we see with you, are a large number of drone strikes. Constant Ukrainian equipment is scurrying back and forth here. Max Proshki, tanks, Bez, Bradleys there. Strikers don't go there, and some kind of incomprehensible movement is constantly taking place. But all this movement is naturally monitored by Russian units, and all equipment constantly under heavy fire and densely destroyed. Well, speaking of Yasnobrodovka, extremely important personnel also arrived today. Let me remind you that just yesterday we discussed that Russian units had entered the very village of Nabrodovka in the south. And today footage has already been published of how Russian units entered Karlovka, which is located north of the Kharlev Reservoir. This is some kind of sensor, a country village, a garden partnership is possible. There are shots that were published by the 25th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, drone strikes and a drone in beer. On the Russian Bek with a landing party on board. In other words, we see movement, and, in general, the footage shows how the Russian armor moved along the roads, entered the most populated area, and strikes were already inflicted on soldiers and equipment here. As we can see, the theses and statements about the fact that there is also progress have progressed far enough, and, on the whole, have been confirmed. I remember, in the previous version of this map, this territory was painted gray. The armed forces of Ukraine regularly try to retreat, take out everything that can still be withdrawn from here. It is not possible to do this centrally quickly. There are shortages of equipment and hundreds of drones over this area, so they are being taken out, evacuated in small groups, one car at a time and what there is. And so they are trying to escape and leave this direction further to the west. The direction is also Kalinova, there and Karlovka, and so on and so forth, where most likely Russian units are unlikely to move further, due to the presence of a large number of strong points on, say, the left side of the Charles Reservoir. Then we move with you to the south. Today, the confirmation of individual cartographers about further progress is published. We have discussed this with you. There is a dense number of densely located, a large number, and quite densely minefields. There is a lot of work to be done here, so now and before moving on, all this needs to be cleaned up. And here, as you can see, there are quite a lot of fields. And for a further offensive along the H15 road, or in the vicinity, it is necessary to carry out a very large amount of work on, let's say, cleaning. Interesting shots receive information with a career located north of Vladimirovka. Remember, we discussed with you that according to both Ukrainian and Russian sources, this stronghold was surrounded. Ukrainians have been surrounded here for a long time. They held a circular defense for a week. But according to the latest data published by Ukrainian sources, they managed to break through the defense and get out of the encirclement and, let's say, connect with the main units of the 72nd Brigade in the area of Vodianov and Ugledar. And from the Russian side, footage of assault actions is being published, extremely interesting assault actions. Here on these frames, we can observe with you the movement of a motorcyclist, a single, lonely motorcyclist, who is storming the Ukrainian opposition. In these frames, we see movement along the forest belt. He didn't hit a single mine, overcame everything, abandoned the motorcycle, landed, and began an unequal battle with Ukrainian units. One soldier against several Ukrainians. Based on this, most cartographers corrected the maps, and also a separate material was even made about this fighter. According to the information, this fighter kept the defense alone in these forest belts for 8 days. It is reported that he drank water from the rain that dripped, which periodically passed and accumulated, collected. And there were also several destroyed, broken Ukrainian positions nearby, where he managed to make sorties, and where he seemed to find food, which allowed him to hold out for 8 days. But after either the rotation took place at the end, or he himself had already run out, perhaps the bull, food, water, retreated and returned to the original positions of the Russian units. But in general, this is the story, and this is how everything basically happened here. On the one hand, Ukrainian units are surrounded. Perhaps one Russian soldier kept a whole company of Ukrainians surrounded there, not allowing them to leave. Perhaps someone there, relatively speaking, with a sniper gun, or something like that, could not find it. Well, there was some really interesting story going on here. I would like more details, as there are a lot of interesting facts from this area, about the encirclement, and about holding a position by one soldier. Well, something very interesting happened here, but I think that over time, as it were, history will reveal all the cards, and tell us a lot of different interesting stories. As for the vintage Staromayorsky, there is no news for the last day. No frames, no geolocations, no breakout attempts, everything is stable enough. But we have discussed the work with you. According to some sources, another grouping will be formed here. Mobilization is proceeding at a rapid pace, Dozens of shots are published daily, as people are simply packing on the street, without even the right to appeal, and all these people go immediately, of course, to training camps. Let me remind you that this whole story of mobilization was taken at the beginning of May. Ukrainian sources: the Ukrainian authorities have reduced, say, the training of soldiers from 2 months to 1.5. And if we take the date of the adoption of the law of mobilization, and today's 20th of June, then I can say that a large number of soldiers who were mobilized during the total mobilization have already passed this military training, and in general are already waiting for the hour when they will be released or any next offensive will be launched.